So, we're here in Vegas, but I actually just got back from Anytime we spend some time at the Texas Card House there in Austin, you are guaranteed some crazy hands. And I've got some crazy hands for you. So we were playing 5-5, no limits, and the games there at the Texas Card House always play at least a little bit bigger than advertised. 5-5 is uncapped there at the Texas Card House. Oftentimes there's gonna be a straddle. Stacks get super deep because this is, as previously discussed, one of those membership clubs where they do not take a rake off of the table. There's just a seat rental charge. So since they're not raking money off the table, all the money stays in the stacks, and the stacks can get quite deep. First interesting hand came when I had the straddle. The hijack raised to $45, the button calls, and we look down at ace king offsuit in the big blinds. Premium hand here, don't want to play out of position. Hijack can have a somewhat wide range, so we're gonna go ahead and put in a pretty standard 3-bet here and make it $200 to go. The initial raiser thinks for a little bit, he lets it go, but the button makes the call. So we are going heads up to a flop here. Comes down ace queen 5 rainbow, so good flop for us. Pretty dry. We're gonna go ahead and c-bet it. I think it's an okay spot to down bet it. We're not super deep, so don't need to worry about getting all the money in. I go ahead and bet $75, and my opponent makes the call. The turn is an offsuit 10, which might not be the most ideal card considering it does complete king jack for a straight. It improves ace 10 to a better hand than us, but I'm not gonna slow down here. I'm still gonna try and get all the money in the middle eventually. So this time I bet $200, $225 to be exact. And my opponent ends up folding pretty quickly. So not too crazy of a hand here, somewhat straightforward. But next interesting hand comes up not too long after that. We play bomb pots here in the meetup games quite often, and the Texas Card House, they play them themselves. They don't even need a meetup game to play them. And they're happy to oblige with some double board bomb pots. Now again, in a double board bomb pot, if your hand is the best hand on one of the boards, then you get half the pot. If it ends up being the best hand on both boards, then you scoop the whole pot. It gets a little bit interesting when there's a 3-way showdown because your hand could be good on one of the boards and the other 2 players could potentially have the same hand and end up getting quartered. So when you have 3 players putting money into a pot and 1 player gets half the money, that's a good situation for that player. In this hand, double board bomb pot, $25 a man, and I have 10-9 suited, in which we see some pretty interesting flops on both boards. On the top board, it comes down 8-7-3 rainbow, and on the bottom board, it comes down 10-9-7 rainbow. So on top, we have an open-ended straight draw, and on the bottom board, we flop top 2 pair. Doesn't get a whole lot better than this in a double board bomb pot. There's an early position bet for $150, and a couple players on his left. He goes ahead and makes the call. I think I'm gonna go ahead and try and play for all the money here. Like I said, it doesn't get too much better than this. We have equity in both situations for sure. I'm gonna go ahead and put in a raise. I make it $500 to go. Folds back to the initial bettor in early position who goes ahead and jams his stack in there. The player in the middle, he's gonna go with his hand as well. He goes ahead and calls all in. I'm happy to oblige as well. I'm gonna go ahead and move all in too. We're gonna be off to the races here. And I asked what these guys, which board these guys are playing, which one they're most interested in. The guy across from me says both, which is interesting. I go ahead and turn my hand over so I can see theirs so we can sweat it along the way. And it turns out we are up against 10-7 and 10-7. They both have the same hand, so an even better situation here. The top turn card is a brick, and the bottom turn card is an interesting one because it gives them an open ender, which isn't great, but it does give me a backdoor flush draw, so we block some of those outs for them. The top river is another brick, so unfortunately we can't make our straight on that board. The bottom board, we do make a flush. So we're good on that board for sure, and as mentioned, we're gonna quarter these guys. They were putting in money and are gonna split that second board. We're gonna get 50% of the entire pot. And with 3 people putting in money, that's gonna mean a profit for us. Would have been nice to scoop the whole thing, but we don't wanna get too greedy, I suppose. This next hand, there's a middle position open for $20. I look down at ace queen offsuit on the button, make the call. The small blind puts in a 3-bet. Makes it $110 to go. The player who opened the pot, he goes ahead and makes the call. Could go either way here. Could be up against a squeeze play here out of the small blind. He does have a run-it-up shirt on, and I know this player. I do think he can mix it up a bit, but I don't think he's gonna get too berserk with too wide of a range. So I'm just gonna go ahead and flat here. I do have the button, so I can play in position post-flop. Flop comes down good for us again. It comes ace, jack, 6, rainbow. There's only a few hands that we lose to, such as pocket aces, we block that hand, ace king, we block that hand, and pocket jacks. Not a lot of combos of that. And then ace jack as well, but we block that too. The small blind continues for $135. The player in the middle folds, and we make a standard flat call here. Turn is pretty interesting. It's another jack, which brings a backdoor flush draw. Once again, my opponent bets to the tune of $225. It's a pretty interesting spot, and I don't think I can find a fold here. It's interesting because I wouldn't expect my opponent to bet a jack on the flop too often into 2 players on an ace-high board. I would often expect a hand such as king jack, queen jack, jack 10, anything with a jack in it aside from ace jack, which we block. I would expect all those hands to maybe check some percentage of the time. Maybe not all the time, but some percentage for sure. I would also expect an ace to slow down here, and I would expect a hand that picks up backdoor equity with a flush draw to go ahead and barrel. So I feel pretty comfortable calling here again. The river's a total brick, offsuit deuce, and once again, my opponent puts out a bet of $395. He's for sure going to be continuing with a lot of his hands that brick out on the river. We don't have any spades, so we don't block any flush draws, which for sure makes me want to call. We block a lot of value hands. There aren't a lot of combinations left that he could have for value on this river. So all of those things, including the fact that I would expect him to check a jack some percentage of the time on the flop, makes me want to go ahead and make the call. And that's what I do. I toss in the call, and my opponent rolls over jack 10 of clubs. So this one doesn't work out too well for us. It's one of those situations where just because I would do something on the flop doesn't mean all of my opponents would do something on the flop. I do know my opponent is a good player. I assume he's definitely a winning player in these games, and once again, he's got a run-it-up t-shirt on, so I can only assume that Jason Somerville gave him some ridiculous advice. Jason Somerville, he's a little bit past his prime, so you know, old habits die hard. Watching those Jason Somerville streams, you pick up some things. It's tough to lose those things out of your game, and this opponent clearly has no idea what he's doing. Just kidding, I do know who this opponent is, and he's a very cool, friendly guy, good player. So, good hand, Chris, I guess. All right, next interesting hand, there's a bunch of limpers, and we look down at 2 black jacks on the button. Go ahead and make it $35 to go. And we see 4 callers, so we don't thin the field one bit. Definitely could have raised it a little bit more there, considering this is Texas after all, but we're off to a flop 5 ways, which comes not exactly super pretty for these pocket jacks. 7-6-4 all hearts, I believe. Action checks all the way over to me, and I'm just gonna go ahead and pot control here. I'm gonna check it, because obviously if we get raised, we're just gonna have to fold. Any hand that continues on this flop is gonna have very good equity, if not beating us already. So I just go ahead and check it back, especially massively multi-way here on this flop. The turn is an offsuit 10, and action checks over to the hijack, who bets $80. There's a call in the cutoff, and I'm gonna go ahead and call here. I've under-repped my hand. The turn changes things sometimes when there's an 8-9, but it's a small enough bet where I think I can call and evaluate rivers, see what happens here. Turn is an offsuit 6, which in the odd instance where we're up against a 10-7 or 7-4, we've now improved to a better hand in that regard. It also bricks out a lot of missed draws. So when my opponent in the hijack bets $150 and the player in the middle folds, I don't think I'm going to be able to fold for such a small amount, considering there could be some instances where my opponent is betting a worse hand for value, such as ace-10. When we're beating bluffs as well as some small number of value hands, that's gonna add up to a call. So I toss it in, and my opponent says he has a 7. That's good news. We can beat a 7. I go ahead and show, and my opponent mucks it. Next up is for sure one of the craziest hands, most interesting, most strange hands that I can remember playing on the vlog in a long time. Perhaps top 5 all time. The under the gun +2 player opens for $25. The player in his direct left calls. The player on his direct left calls. There's one call in hijack or cutoff. And once again, we're looking down at ace queen off suit on the button. This time, I'm gonna go ahead and put in the squeeze. There's one or two too many players in this pot for my liking with ace queen off suit. We have some blockers to some good hands, so I'm gonna go ahead and try and take this one down. I make it $130 there on the button. And the initial raiser folds, but the player to his left makes the call. The player on my right folds. As we're about to see the flop, my opponent says something interesting. He says, "I got nothing, bro." To which I say, "All right, bro." And then he says, "Just 4-5.
I got a 4-5. Put a 4-5 in.
All right, so he's announced that he has 4-5. Shortly after which, the flop comes down ace 2-3 with 2 clubs. It gets even more interesting. Hang on. It gets even more interesting here when my opponent goes ahead and bombs it, bets $400 immediately. Not exactly loving the situation after he supposedly announced his hand. The board is kind of connected. We lose to some 2 pairs here, aces up, and potentially, if he was somehow being honest, we lose to a flopped wheel, as well as his pocket 2s, pocket 3s. But having ace queen here, not gonna fold. Gonna have to see one more card at least. I go ahead and make the call. Turn is an interesting one. It's the king of clubs, which adds the nut flush draw to our holding, considering we have the queen of clubs. My opponent is not done bombing at this pot, however. This time he bets to the tune of $900. It's a little bit straightforward from my perspective. We're definitely gonna be beat a bunch of the time here, and I'm just gonna go ahead and go with it. Before I stick the money in there, I very honestly say, well, I have this card, and I show the queen of clubs. Well, I got this card. And say, I guess I'm just gonna have to go with it, and I move all in. Now, it's not that much more money. It's literally maybe $100 extra. Somehow my opponent does not snap call. I think there's some potential I'm getting slow rolled here by a better hand than mine. I don't expect him to ever fold here for such a minute amount compared to the pot. And it gets really weird when my opponent continues to think and think and think. Not exactly sure what's going on here. Still expecting him to eventually put the money in. In the end, my opponent eventually folds. He folds. My opponent folds. Yeah, about $100 more. I suspect that my opponent had no pair, no draw, was using his story of the 4-5 to go ahead and try and take this pot down, and in fact had absolutely nothing whatsoever. Maybe like 10-9, 9-8, 8-7 with no club. Well, didn't matter if he had a club since I showed the queen of clubs. I'm pretty sure he was drawing dead, whatever it was. So maybe I shouldn't have shown the queen of clubs like that. It was just an honest sort of reaction from me in the moment where I was like, well, let's do this. Let's see what happens. Usually when I jam, I show my cards first, usually not before the other player calls. But that's what happened. I'm gonna take it. I'll be happy to take it down. Gets us unstuck after that ace queen versus Jack 10 debacle, and things are looking up here. We've got one more interesting hand to take a look at here. It's another double board bomb pot. Really enjoying these double board bomb pots. I think it makes for a nice change of pace. It's definitely something interesting. Breaks up the monotony of the you know, 2 blind, 10-handed or 9-handed no limit hold'em. See a lot more cards, a lot more fun. All right, in this one we have the old King 6 off, $25 a person again, and we're off to see 2 flops, which on top comes down King 7 rainbow, flopping us trips, and on the bottom it's Jack 5-3 with 2 hearts, giving us absolutely nothing. So I don't want to go too crazy here, because if anybody out there has a king in their hand, chances are we are gonna get scooped. There's a couple kings left. There's King 2, there's King 4, but a lot of other kings out there potentially that would be a better hand on both boards. So I check it, and action checks to a middle position player who puts out a bet. He bets $125, folds over to me, and we're just gonna go ahead and call here and see what develops. The top turn is the 3 of spades, and the bottom turn is the 6 of clubs, adding a backdoor flush draw on both boards. So now we can feel a little bit more comfortable here. We've added a pair on the other board, and it's a little bit tougher for us to get scooped in this situation now. I'm happy to play for a lot more money now that we have added equity on both boards. However, action checks all the way through. The river on top is an offsuit 4, and the river on bottom is an offsuit ace. Definitely gonna go for some value here, again, especially after the turn checks through, feeling very comfortable about my hand. I go ahead and bet $300, and my opponent doesn't think too long before making the call. We go ahead and flip it over, and my opponent shows us King 5. So we were in fact getting scooped until the turn, where we end up making a better pair than his pair of fives on that second board. Drag in a nice little pot here towards the end of the night, and we end up finding ourselves a great session, a rare great session for me at the Texas Card House in Austin, considering before this weekend I should say, we were stuck about $5,000 across a few sessions down there in this card room. We get into this game for $2,000, cash out of this game for $3,600, and I forget, but I think it's like $80. $3,680. Profit of $1,680. Not only that, but add to it a good session the night before, playing some 5-5. Blocked up a win of a little over $1,000 that night. So across 2 sessions at the Texas Card House, we pull in a profit of $2,600. Chop our losses in half at the Texas Card House, but things are looking up. Pretty happy about that session, those 2 sessions down there. Good trip to Texas. Now we're back in Las Vegas. As you can see, the Las Vegas Strip behind us. Long time, it's been a long time, but we're gonna go check out some 510 here at the Bellagio. Wrapping up the session over here at the Bellagio. You probably can't see that, but it's 3:24 in the AM. Ran into a pretty tough spot during this 5-10 session. I was in the must move game. Actually, I was in the must move game, which means you move into a different game out of the must move into another must move, or moving into the main game. That's sort of beside the point, aside from where we were playing four-handed. Playing four-handed with a straddle on. The button limps in. I look down at Jack 9 offsuit in the big blind incomplete, and the straddle checks. The flop came down Jack 9-3 with 2 spades, and I don't have a spade in my hand. I decided to lead right out for $40. Big blind folds, and the straddler puts in a small raise to $100. I don't want to let him draw for cheaply. A lot of times people will set their own price, but either way we have top 2 pair, and I'm looking to get more value. So I put in a 3-bet on the flop to $340, and my opponent makes the call. The turn is an offsuit king, which not the best card, but not the worst card. Worst card would be a spade. Again, I don't have any spades in my hand. I also don't block the straight, so again, not the greatest card. We also lose to king jack, but I decide to keep firing, keep charging those potential flush draws out there. I bet $410 here on the turn, and my opponent thinks for a little while before calling. The river is another less than ideal card. It's another king, offsuit king. So our 2 pair got counterfeited here. I go ahead and check it over to my opponent since I don't think I can get value from too much worse at this point. I can only hope to induce versus miss draws. So after I check, my opponent does go ahead and jam all in, but I don't feel that great about it, obviously. You know, the straight is still there, although I'm not super worried about a straight because there was a flush draw on the flop, and I would think that my opponent would raise the turn some frequency and try and get value from both flopped sets, 2 pairs, and potential flush draws. So we can discount that hand some percentage of the time, albeit not 100% of the time. We lose to hands such as king queen of spades, king 10 of spades, things like that. Hands that had a flush draw and have backdoored into rivered trips. What else do we lose to? I wouldn't think too much. We block full houses, so I'm not super worried about that situation. Just seems unlikely. I decided to rely on the fact that I don't have any spades in my hand, and that he would have to, I figure, raise the turn some percentage of the time, like I said, with a straight. Rely on those factors, talk myself into a call, toss it in, and we get shown pocket aces. You know, there was some inkling in my mind that when he limped in pre-flop that he might have done so with a strong hand. It works out perfectly for him. He somehow manages to get the maximum in a limped pot with his pocket aces. It took a counterfeited 2-pair and a reasonable run out in order to get that maximum. But I'm pretty sure I could have found a fold. I think I'm not super happy with the call, but I do think there is merit to it. Again, since we don't block any flush draws and the board sort of bricks out, but our absolute value of our hand definitely goes down. There's also other aspects. I try not to talk about my opponents too much in these hand histories. This opponent had lost a couple of hands prior in very recent history, and I felt like he could have been steaming slightly, but turns out incorrect. Turns out he had a value hand there on the river, not a bluff. So we lose a big pot there. The good news, however, is that stuck it out, put in the grind, stayed longer than I was expecting to. Got up at like 9:30 this morning, so I'm pretty tired right now. Stuck with it, grinded it out. There was a raise, a call. I call pocket eights. The big blind puts in a 3-bet. We all call, so there is like almost $700 in the pot going into the flop. The flop brings 3 to a straight. I have a gut shot with my pocket eights, checks through. We turn a set, action checks to the third player who puts out a bet of $400. I just flat call. The other 2 players fold. We fill up on the river. He jams for not a whole lot more. That money's coming our way. So we get into this game, $3,500. We cash out from this game for $3,575. You guys know what that means. That means a profit of $75. All right, guys, it's a wrap from here. The meetup game train rolls on. The first meetup game in Las Vegas of 2019. It hasn't even happened yet, believe it or not. We've been doing so much traveling this year. It's happening this week. It's happening Tuesday, May 14th at a new location, the South Point. I don't believe we've even captured the South Point on the vlog thus far. That will change this week. 2-5, no limit hold'em. Come join us if you're in town. If you can make it, it should be a really fun one. First one of 2019 here in Las Vegas. See you there.